Hello guys, welcome back to Unique Arts. I am Costco Picasso, and today I'm going to be doing a tag. So, if you watched my 2024 channel goals, I wanted to be more properly booktubish. I technically switched over to booktube a little over a year ago, but I only started really making more videos, was being more active on my channel at really the start of this year. And one of the things I wanted to do was to be more properly booktubish, and one of the things I thought of, at least with that, was to do more tags, because I've actually never done one besides the newbie tag, and that wasn't a very good video. I don't recommend watching it. But I was not tagged in this. In fact, I saw it from a video for a guy named Revenant Reads. I just subscribed to him and I was going through some of his videos, and he did this tag like 3 years ago when his channel was new. Um, and the original tag comes from came from the novel Nomad, which is like 7 years old now at this point. So I wasn't tagged by anyone, but I'm gonna do it anyhow. Uh, and we'll see how this goes. I kind of figured this might be an interesting tag to do, so that's what I'm gonna do. Uh, if you follow my channel, you kind of know I'm more generally a humanities guy. Well, just in general, again. I guess if I had to be something more in particular, perhaps art history. I am in grad school for philosophy, but I always feel unprepared to talk about philosophical things. A lot like Socrates. You know, the only thing I know is that I know nothing. The more I learn about philosophy stuff, the topics, I feel like the more ill-equipped I am to discuss them. So maybe I'll get better at that at least. But regardless, I do enjoy history. In fact, I've been heavily considering going to graduate school in history, perhaps doing an online program, and then maybe even trying to get a PhD in history or something like public history. I think that would be fun. Uh, but we'll see. So maybe I could actually get a job that I enjoy, something pertaining to teaching or the cultural sector, something like historic sites. I don't know. We'll see. This is just me rambling for the first couple minutes, I guess. But out of the way, we'll get into some of the prompts. So the first prompt is, and to be honest, she did this when she was like the novel Nomad did this when she was actually walking a trail. Like it was a 20 something K. She's Australian. It was a good video. I recommend you watch it. But first steps is what book, movie, person, or place introduced you to history or historical fiction. Um, Revenant Reads, I think, answered for every single one, like what book, movie, person, place would have been influential on that. She pretty much just said like the one thing that was the biggest, and I mean, overall, I guess what introduced me to history would be my parents, of course. Just their interest in history. A specific book that I mean, and also speaking of like just books, I don't actually read a lot of historical fiction. I have started to relatively recently. I guess you could call Grimnir Saga that to a degree, and same with uh, the Witchy War series. I just finished Witchy, or I'm about finished with Witchy Winter. I read Witchy Eye. I enjoyed Witchy Eye a lot more than Witchy Winter, by DJ Butler. But a specific book that comes to mind that I really enjoyed, and I read it when I was pretty young, uh, is Huckleberry Finn, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. And I read it when I got grounded for like, it was somewhere between like 10 days to 2 weeks. I think I was around 9 or 10. I remember the house I lived in, and this was back in Illinois when I was a kid. I haven't lived in Illinois for a while, but I was grounded, and so I wasn't allowed to do anything. But I was allowed to read. So I read The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, and I was kind of having a race with my older brother who was reading The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, but I really enjoyed it. And that was kind of like a more regional thing too. I know Missouri. I grew up in Illinois, just crossed the Mississippi, but it's like that whole colonial, even during like the days of slavery period, has seemed kind of attractive to me. I guess ever since then, I wouldn't say it's necessarily my favorite, but in terms of Huckleberry Finn, I would say perhaps is what introduced me. Of course, there were some movies. I mean, just like the Wild West stuff. My grandma was a big John Wayne fan, and even like more contemporary Western comedy stuff like Shanghai Noon. Shanghai Nights. I enjoyed those a lot when I was younger. Uh, and then for places though, persons I kind of already mentioned my parents. I feel like that helps. My grandma's pretty into history herself as well. But place, I grew up in Central Illinois, and pretty much the only thing we got going for us besides corn and soybeans is Abraham Lincoln, and that's like a big thing that most people are raised to be proud of. Being older now, I know Abraham Lincoln's a bit more controversial, expanding the executive power and stuff like that, and not doing things that are necessarily good. But I mean, at the same time, he maintained the union. So there's that. But we get a lot of like Lincoln history, like the old Salem village where Lincoln had lived when he was younger, before he was famous. And hear about Frederick Douglass. I didn't live in Springfield, but we do a lot of field trips to Springfield, to the old state capitol, and stuff like that. The old state capitol building, that is. And just the Lincoln Museum. I've been to his tomb a lot. So, I mean, I feel like that stuff definitely helped. And I've always enjoyed going to historical sites. We've traveled a lot. When I was a kid, we traveled a lot, just mostly because we moved around a lot, or a fair amount at least. And just going to like historical sites wherever we were visiting was always neat. I enjoyed doing stuff like that. So hopefully that helps. Okay, second prompt is well trodden path. What is your favorite historical recommendation? Book, place, or movie? I don't know. I do highly recommend reading The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. That's not his. That I guess would you call that historical fiction? If anything, it was kind of like contemporary, just normal fiction at the time. I think of it more of historical in the sense that it's from a bygone era. Mark Twain is an excellent author, though. I highly recommend pretty much reading any Mark Twain. Um, he's like perhaps one of the classic American authors that comes to mind when I think of American authors. Definitely. And I do recommend going to places like Springfield, Illinois. Like every state seems to have a Springfield. But Lincoln is worth uh, learning more about. I mean, even here, where I live in Montana, and I'm not planning on being in Montana very much longer, I'm moving, but there are a couple of really cool historical sites. Butte, Montana has the Copper King Mansion, which is super cool. There's the Daly Mansion over in Hamilton in the Bitterroot Valley, owned by Marcus Daly, the Irish-born mining magnate. And that stuff's really cool too. They host the Highland Games out at Marcus Daly's mansion every August. And I don't know about movies. I enjoy just watch some John Ford movies, and then maybe some mostly just John Ford. Watch John Ford movies. The director, of course. And then good boots. I don't know if this question is necessarily directed towards me properly, but it's what is your favorite historical fashion era? And I don't know. I just rewatched Pride and Prejudice with my wife, and I thought the fashion then was pretty good. But I guess if I had to pick a favorite, one that I tend to romanticize, I tend to romanticize the past a lot. I think many people do. It's either we tend to romanticize it or we tend to just like crap all over it and we only notice their flaws. Like, oh, these people are great people, but they owned slaves, so therefore everything they said is obsolete, which I think isn't fair. But regardless, favorite historical fashion era, I would probably say like turn of the century, around 1900s, like into World War One. I like that. Like we still, it was before the mass casualization of fashion, and the people look good. But it's like it seems like it's something we could still like. If you dress like that, you might stand out a bit, especially depending on the circumstance. Like if you're just wearing it to Walmart. But I feel like it's more attainable rather than like the Pride and Prejudice stuff. Like it's not too far gone, you know. Like people still wear a three-piece suit, just not for everyday dress. So there's that, I guess. Close to home. So what is a historical read set in your home country? So I'm an American. I think a lot of people that are doing these videos are American. I would actually love to hear someone who's not American. I have particular interest in places like Germany and England, Ireland, Scotland, because that's where a lot of my ancestry comes from. But I am an American. It's a big country. So historical reads sit in my home country. There are a lot. Uh, Something that we get a lot of in the Mountain West. I never noticed it so much back east, but maybe I was just too young. Are these little like they all the books look the same. I'll put a picture up of a couple or whatever. They're tannish, brownish, or whatever, and it's always like a historic. It's just for a town or maybe for a big historic site, and they just have a lot of historic information cram packed in there. They're not exactly exciting reads necessarily, but it's a lot of you just get a lot of history for those places. Um, and so those are fair enough. I like those. One of the museums I worked at sold, you know, well, both the museums I worked at, those were both down in Idaho, sold several of those for like the town they were based in, but also for some neighboring towns and stuff like that. But so maybe that's why I mostly think of them as related to the Mountain West. I guess let me know if you guys get those as well for your state. Uh, I've spent my adult life in Idaho and Montana. If we're speaking about like America in general, I think any historical reads about like any of the founding fathers are probably welcome. There are some I'm more particularly fond of, like James Madison and Thomas Jefferson and or George Washington. But not like a really popular one today is Alexander Hamilton, and I think he's one of the worst founding fathers, easily. But obviously they were kind of variegated in their opinions and stuff like that, which is welcome. And the only family name one I could think of is Thomas Fitzsimmons, but he was a Federalist as well, so that's not bueno. But and I don't know if I was related to him. He just has a name that my grandma has. But still, so and then the trail not taken. What historical eras do you avoid? I don't think I particularly avoid any historical era. There are some that I'm not as interested in. In many ways, I enjoy the 19th century the most. And then 20th century is hit or miss for me. And 21st century, I don't really. Lots of times this would not be considered history, I guess, as contemporary life. But I like 21st century mostly as it relates to people doing like revival stuff related back to other periods anyhow. uh Medieval stuff is interesting. I'm not as equipped as I would like to be with it. uh it's mostly geographical. I wouldn't say there's an era. Like I just don't care as much about stuff outside of America and in Europe for the most part. I do like Oceania. That's probably would be my third on that list. But stuff like East Asia or the Middle East or Africa, I just, or even South America, in many ways, not even really Central America, I just don't really care. I'm not really as interested in it. Not to say that there isn't stuff that isn't interesting about it. It just doesn't really get my attention or any of my time. So there's that, I suppose. I guess if there's any specific era in particular that I tend to be less interested in, that would be prehistoric, like Stone Age. Um, there are still interesting things about that, though. Stonehenge is cool, and lots of the other uh, stone monuments in the British Isles and whatnot, and in France. So I don't know. And then trail map. What historical reads are on your TBR? There are a couple. I want to. There's this book I don't have. It's kind of on my wish list. Uh, on Taunton Castle, which is a castle in Somerset. It is owned in the home of the museum for the Somerset Archaeological and like Natural History Society, which I'm a member of, only as of recently. But not that I can do too much with them because I've never even been to England, and I can't go regularly or anything like that. But that's on my wish list. I have a couple books about Robert the Bruce I would like to read. I actually have a great great grandma Bruce, so I guess that's not super recent, but I actually joined the family of Bruce International. They let me join. I mean, they pretty much let anyone join if you have interest in Scottish stuff, but there's like that's an associate member. To be a regular member, you have to be a Bruce, and I'm not like I haven't like generally the requirements is be a Bruce. Like your mom was a Bruce or your grandma, but it's like great great grandma, and I didn't know her. I knew her daughter, but my great grandma, but she wasn't called Bruce at that point. She had a German name, because the Bruce married a German man. But yeah, but they let me join, so that's been cool. And now I just got to get my Bruce tartan, my kilt. I already have a couple kilts, but not a Bruce one. I don't have any like particular clan kilt because I didn't know which clan I should get, so I have like a generic Scottish heritage one. If you care about that, I guess. Let me know if you have any kilts. But yeah, I got a couple about Bruce. I have one right here. It's pretty generic history read. I'm already kind of acquainted, as you may imagine. History of the Vikings, Children of Ash and Elm by Neil Price. I'm not too much into it. I only just started it recently. It's not bad either. It's mostly been like a refresh. Some new information though. So that's cool. But I don't think I have any other specific history TBRs on my list currently. I would like to keep something on my list or that I'm actively reading that's history and not just like fiction or something like that, you know. So I do want to read that another I wish would be the final book of historical fiction for the Grimnir saga, The Doom of right? The Doom of Odin? That's what it's called, I think. By Scott Odin, but it only came out like 4 or 5 months ago or something like that, and so I can't get it for cheap. And it's not on Audible either. So I don't know when I'll be getting that. Hopefully relatively soon, I guess. It's not bad. I enjoyed the first book of that series as well more than the second book, but still, okay. And then pioneers. What historical person inspires you? In the Mountain West, we have a lot of what we call pioneers because they were settled relatively recent. America as a whole was settled relatively recently. I mean, you go to Europe and it's a lot older. But I mean by European colonizers, the ones who built the country, pretty much. But you know what I mean. I think. I hope so. But again, growing up in Illinois, Abraham Lincoln would definitely have been a favorite. I think I've grown out of that a bit, and as I mentioned them earlier, but someone like Thomas Jefferson, James Madison are easily some of my favorite historical figures. Living in the Mountain West, we think of pretty much any of your ancestors that moved to the Mountain West as pioneers themselves, even if they're not written about. There's no history book written about them. That's not really my case anyway, because I moved here when I moved to Arizona when I was a teenager, and then I went to college in Idaho. And I wouldn't consider myself a pioneer or my parents necessarily. But just a lot of the Mormon settlers, perhaps. Brigham Young is a very controversial figure, but he's a very important figure for settling the Mountain West. Very much, actually, if people may choose to ignore that, I guess. But I guess it's inspiring in some regards. I don't know. I think the idea of settling a mostly untouched land is a big challenge. It honestly sounds really fun. I don't think there's really anything I can do about that now. I can't just take a group of people and go do that. Not that anyone would go with me anyway. But I feel like that'd be a big challenge, and definitely was a big challenge. It's just the reason we have a lot of Mormons now in the Mountain West. Actually, I'm a Mormon, so so it doesn't really bother me so much, but it might bother other people. But Salt Lake City is still not a nice city. I don't recommend going. Actually, it's worth going to like see the historical stuff, about like the pioneers. But I mean, as far as like, I just don't like cities. I guess just to be honest, I like the historical part of cities in their charm, but cities tend to be more crime ridden and run down and too crowded anyhow. So I'm just not a big fan of cities, generally speaking. At least once they get to like a certain size. Smaller cities don't tend to bother me so much, but regardless, I guess hopefully that was cohesive. But as far as tagging, it says tag your fellow history nerds. Again, I don't know if I would consider myself a history nerd. I kind of have just a broad general interest in the humanities, and history is just a part of that, part of the liberal arts. I can go ahead and tag my brother at Liam's Lyceum because I know he has some similar history interests. He's kind of more of a medievalist, stuff like that. So I guess I'd be interested in hearing what he has to say. Obviously, we were raised together, so he might have some similar answers. But regardless, I don't really watch too many booktubers, if I'm being honest. The only other one I can think of really is T from Erudite Adventure. And so I guess if he would, I don't know if he is a huge history buff. But if you want to, T, if you watch this video, go ahead and feel free to do it as well. So I guess Liam and T. And there's that. But I will see you guys next time. Let me know if you thought this was okay. I might try to find a couple more tags, even if I don't get tagged myself. just do it anyhow, and we'll see. And maybe I'll do that so I can do more tags to be more properly booktube-ish as I had set out to be. But if not, oh well, at least I did one. And does that count for my hitting my 2024 goal? Uh, Either way, hope you guys have a good one. And please feel free to comment, like, subscribe if you aren't. And I'll see you guys next time.